The night she whispered those words, I felt my world tilt on its axis. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, sunlight spilling across the quiet suburban street, when my best friend's mom leaned against the doorframe, brushed a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, and said softly, "He's staying at his dad's, want to join me for dinner?" The way she said it wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't suggestive. It was lonely. And that's what made my heart pound. Before we step into what happened next, I want you to pause for a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet ways people save each other without even realizing it, take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope still exists, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this matter because real life is made of moments like these. Her name was Maricela Vaughn. She was nothing like the moms you see in sitcoms. She didn't hover or scold or bake cookies with a forced smile. She carried herself with a calm dignity, like someone who had endured more than she ever let on. Her eyes were the kind that looked like they were always holding back a storm. My name is Kieran Vale, and I was 19 that summer. Her son, Rowan, had been my best friend since we were 10. We grew up racing bikes down cracked sidewalks, sneaking into old construction sites, dreaming about leaving our small town of Westbridge for something bigger. Rowan had always been the fearless one. I was the cautious shadow beside him. But that summer, everything felt different. Rowan's parents had finalized their divorce in early spring. His father moved across town. Weekends were divided like possessions in a courtroom. Rowan pretended it didn't bother him, but I saw the way he stared at his phone waiting for texts that never came. I saw the way his laughter had grown thinner. I started coming around the house more often, partly for Rowan, partly because I hated the thought of Maricela sitting alone in that too quiet kitchen. The house felt bigger now, emptier, like it echoed. That Saturday, Rowan had gone to spend the weekend with his dad. I had stopped by to return a book I'd borrowed, expecting to leave after a quick hello. Instead, I found Maricela standing in the doorway, sunlight catching the faint silver threads in her hair. "He's staying at his dad's, want to join me for dinner?" I hesitated. Every warning bell in my mind rang at once. She was my best friend's mother. This was complicated territory. But there was something fragile in her expression that made it impossible to walk away. It wasn't temptation. It was compassion. And maybe, if I'm being honest, curiosity about the sadness she carried like an invisible weight. We ate outside on the back patio, under a pale blue sky. It was early evening but still bright, the kind of day that smelled like cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. She had made lemon herb chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread from the bakery downtown. At first, conversation felt stiff. We talked about Rowan's college applications, about my summer job at the hardware store, about the weather. But slowly, the edges softened. She told me about her childhood in a small coastal town. About how she used to dream of becoming a painter. About how she gave up art when Rowan was born because real life felt more urgent. She laughed when she said it, but her fingers tightened around her fork. I had never seen her as anything other than my friend's mom. But that evening, I saw her as a person. A woman who had sacrificed, endured, loved deeply, and lost parts of herself along the way. And for the first time in my life, I realized adults don't have everything figured out. As weeks passed, those dinners became a quiet routine. Always during the day or early evening. Always innocent. Rowan was usually at practice, or out with friends, or at his dad's place. I would stop by under some excuse, helping with the lawn, fixing a shelf, returning mail. But what we were really doing was keeping each other company. I was struggling more than anyone knew. My own mother had passed away when I was 16, and my father coped by working double shifts and burying himself in silence. Our house was heavy with unspoken grief. I had learned to carry my pain alone. Maricela, without trying, made it easier to breathe. She would ask about my mom. Not in a way that dug at wounds, but in a way that honored her memory. She listened. Really listened. And in return, I listened to her talk about the loneliness that crept in after the divorce, the guilt she felt, the fear that she had failed her son. There was nothing romantic about it. What grew between us was something quieter and far more powerful. Understanding. But small towns are cruel to quiet connections. One afternoon, Rowan came home earlier than expected. He found us in the kitchen, laughing over a flour-covered disaster of a cake we had tried to bake. The air changed instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just looked hurt. That look cut deeper than any accusation could have. After that, he stopped answering my texts as quickly. He canceled plans. When we did meet, he was distant, guarded. I could see the narrative forming in his head, one built on betrayal. I wanted to explain. To tell him there was nothing inappropriate, nothing secretive. But how do you explain emotional closeness without making it sound worse? Maricela noticed it too. She grew quieter. More careful. She stopped asking me to stay for dinner. One evening, I found her sitting alone on the back steps, staring at the garden. This isn't fair to Rowan, she said softly. There was no accusation in her tone. Just regret. She told me she didn't want to risk her son feeling replaced, even emotionally. That he had already lost enough. I walked home that night with a weight in my chest that felt unbearable. For the first time since my mother died, I felt like I was losing something again. Weeks passed. The distance between Rowan and me grew. I missed him. I missed her too, but in a different way. Then something happened that changed everything. Rowan got into a fight at his dad's house. I don't know the details, only that it ended with him storming out and walking 3 miles back to his mom's place in the midday heat. I happened to be there, helping fix a broken fence. He looked shattered. Not angry. Shattered. He broke down in the living room, years of bottled frustration pouring out. About the divorce. About feeling like a weekend obligation. About feeling invisible. Maricela knelt beside him, holding his face in her hands, tears streaming down her own cheeks. In that moment, I saw the purest form of love. I stepped back, giving them space. But Rowan looked at me and said something I will never forget. You stayed. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. He told me he'd been scared. Scared that I would drift away like everything else seemed to. Scared that he was losing not just his dad, but his best friend too. And I realized then that his jealousy hadn't been about suspicion. It had been about fear. That afternoon, under bright unforgiving sunlight, the three of us talked honestly for the first time. About boundaries. About loneliness. About how sometimes people lean on each other not because they want something wrong, but because they're trying to survive. I told Rowan that his mom had helped me through the hardest months of my life without even knowing it. That she reminded me what warmth felt like after years of cold. Silence. He looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Understanding. From that day forward, things changed. I still came over. But now it was open. Transparent. Rowan would join us for dinner. Sometimes we'd all cook together, sunlight flooding the kitchen as music played softly from an old speaker. The tension dissolved into something healthier. And Maricela began painting again. It started small. A canvas propped up in the corner of the dining room. Then another. Soon, the walls filled with colors that looked like emotions made visible. Soft blues, fierce reds, warm golds. She told us she had forgotten how much it felt like herself. Watching her reclaim that part of her identity was like witnessing someone step out of a shadow. As for me, I began applying to colleges outside Westbridge. I realized I had been hiding here, afraid to leave because loss had already taken so much from me. But healing doesn't mean staying small. The day I got my acceptance letter, I ran to their house first. Rowan tackled me in a hug. Maricela cried and insisted on baking a celebratory cake, flour flying everywhere again. It was still daytime when I stood in their backyard, looking at the life we had almost lost to misunderstanding. That whisper months ago had not been an invitation to something forbidden. It had been a quiet plea for connection. And we had all answered it in our own imperfect ways. If this story has touched your heart even a little, if you've ever misunderstood someone you love or been misunderstood yourself, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters. Sometimes, the most dangerous assumptions are the ones we never speak aloud. Before I finish, I want to ask you something special. Comment the word stayed if you believe that showing up for the people you love can change everything. The morning I left for college, the sun rose bright and golden over Westbridge. Rowan stood beside his mom in the driveway. There were no dramatic speeches. Just tight hugs and quiet promises. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them standing together, stronger than they had been a year before. We hadn't crossed any lines. We had built something better. We had chosen honesty over suspicion, courage over fear, and connection over isolation. And sometimes, that is more powerful than any romance could ever be. Because in the end, love isn't always about who you fall for. Sometimes, it's about who you stay for.